They thought his hands shook because of age. They thought he was fragile. But when he stepped onto the firing line, every shot told a story they couldn't believe. The mess hall was alive with noise. Forks clinked against metal trays, chairs scraped across the concrete floor, and the chatter of new recruits filled every corner of the room. At a table near the center, half a dozen young men in crisp uniforms leaned forward, voices lowered, eyes darting toward the far end of the room. He was there again. The old man, nobody knew his real age, but they guessed somewhere in his 70s, maybe older. His back was straight, but his hands betrayed him. They trembled when he lifted his coffee mug, shook when he tried to tear open a sugar packet, even quivered as he folded a napkin with deliberate care. The recruits noticed. They always noticed. They called him Grandpa. At first, it was a harmless nickname, whispered among themselves when he passed through the mess hall line or sat alone with his tray. But as days turned to weeks, the jokes grew louder. Some imitated his shaking hands, others exaggerated his slow steps. They laughed at the way his fingers fumbled with utensils, how the cup rattled against the saucer when he set it down. And yet, he never reacted. He never looked their way, never raised his voice. He simply sipped his coffee, straightened his tray, and carried on as if their mockery passed straight through him. It was supposed to be a simple qualification day, a chance for new recruits to prove their aim, learn weapon discipline, and show the range officers what they could do. Rows of targets were set up at staggered distances, paper silhouettes lined in perfect order, waiting to be punctured by lead. The recruits were eager, full of bravado. Some had hunted back home, others had grown up around rifles. They compared groupings, swapped jokes, and competed with each other even before the first command was given. Then he arrived. The old man stepped onto the range with the same quiet composure he carried in the mess hall. A range officer nodded at him respectfully, handed him a rifle, and pointed him toward the farthest lane. The recruits snickered when they saw his hands shaking as he loaded the magazine. "Watch him drop the mag," one muttered. "Bet he can't even see the target," another added. Their laughter carried, sharp in the morning air. The old man heard it. He always heard it. But he didn't look their way. His focus was on the rifle, the weight of it in his hands, the feel of the stock pressed against his shoulder. The tremor was there, visible even as he settled into position. The recruits leaned in, ready to witness the inevitable failure. But then, the first shot rang out. The rifle cracked, echoing across the range. The paper silhouette at 300 meters jerked, a neat hole punched straight through its center. Another shot followed, then another, each one precise, each one deliberate. The recruits' laughter faded, replaced by silence. The old man's hands still shook when he lowered the rifle, but the bullets hadn't missed. They never did, and that's when the first question surfaced in their minds, the kind of question that lingers unanswered. Who was he really? Did you see that? Not a single miss. Guy's a machine. How the hell does he do it with hands like that? Some old sniper maybe. I don't know. Nobody tells us anything. Rumors sprouted quickly, twisting into legend before facts ever caught up. Some said he was a retired range instructor. Others whispered he'd been in special forces. Nobody had proof. Nobody asked. And the old man? He said nothing. He returned to the mess hall, drank his coffee, and ignored the stares. But deep inside, memory stirred. Memory of a different time, a different rifle, a different war. Vietnam, 1967. The jungle smelled of rot and gunpowder, the air thick with humidity that clung to skin and soaked uniforms. Helicopter blades thundered overhead, chopping the sky into shards of sound. And on the ground, young men carried rifles heavier than their own fear, marching through mud that swallowed boots whole. He was young then, just 24. His name wasn't Grandpa yet. It was Lieutenant Carter Hayes, squad leader, 1st Cavalry Division. His hands didn't shake in those days, not from age anyway, but from adrenaline, from the constant jolt of survival. They gripped his rifle so tightly, his knuckles turned white, steadied scopes while bullets cracked through the trees, clenched stretchers carrying wounded men who screamed for their mothers. Hayes learned quickly in Vietnam. He had to. The jungle didn't forgive mistakes, and neither did the enemy. Snipers hid in tree lines, mines waited under leaves, and every step could be the last. But Hayes had something others didn't control. Where others flinched, he aimed. Where others hesitated, he pulled the trigger. His men followed him not because he was loud, but because he was steady. Steady, until the day the ground itself betrayed them. It was near the village of Ap Bach, deep in contested territory. Hayes and his squad were on a recon patrol, tasked with securing a small clearing where helicopters could land supplies. The jungle was quiet that morning, too quiet, some said. The silence pressed against their ears, unnatural in a place alive with insects and birds. Then came the first explosion, a mine. The blast tore through the lead soldier, hurling him into the trees. Chaos erupted instantly. Gunfire cracked from hidden positions, muzzle flashes blinking like fireflies in the undergrowth. Men screamed, scrambled for cover, returned fire blindly. Hayes hit the ground, mud splattering across his face. His hands shook, but not from fear, from fury, from the surge of adrenaline that sharpened every sound, every sight. He raised his rifle, sighted through the smoke, and squeezed the trigger. One shot, a muzzle flash vanished. Another shot, the jungle stilled in that direction. He fired again, each shot deliberate, each one ending a threat his men couldn't even see. His hands trembled between shots, but the bullets never strayed. By the end, silence returned. The jungle exhaled. The ambush had failed, not because they weren't prepared, but because one man had held steady when everything else broke apart. That day, his squad stopped calling him lieutenant. They called him Ghost, because he hit targets no one else could see, silenced enemies no one else even knew were there. Decades later, standing on that modern range with young recruits staring, Carter Hayes was still Ghost. His hair had gone silver, his body slower, but his hands, those hands carried every memory, every trigger pull, every life saved and lost. The tremor wasn't weakness, it was the echo of jungles, of gunfire, of the weight of decades. The recruits didn't know that, not yet, but they would, because one photograph, one question, one unexpected reveal, would drag his past into the light and change how they saw him forever. The recruits couldn't stop talking about it. Day after the range session, the whispers spread like wildfire. Some claimed the old man's rifle had been modified, others swore the targets were rigged, but none of them could explain the grouping. Not a single myth. At that distance, even seasoned shooters faltered. Yet his shots had been flawless. The mess hall felt different that evening. The young men still clustered together, but their laughter carried hesitation now. Their jokes came softer, as if they weren't entirely sure he deserved them anymore. He sat at his usual table, alone, sipping coffee from the same chipped mug. His hands still shook. That hadn't changed, but their eyes had. And then came the photograph, framed pictures of squadrons, missions and ceremonies stretched along the walls, a silent gallery of men and women who'd worn the uniform before. Recruits often passed them without a glance, too focused on drills, deadlines, and the weight of their own ambition. But one night, a storm cut the power briefly, leaving the barracks dimly lit by emergency lights. With nothing else to do, a group of recruits wandered the halls, flashlights sweeping across the frames. That's when one of them stopped. Wait. Hold it there. That photo, go back. The beam of light caught an image from decades ago, black and white, edges yellowed with time. A group of soldiers stood in front of a Phantom F-4 jet, helmets under arms, uniforms soaked in sweat. In the center, a young lieutenant stared at the camera with sharp eyes. His jaw was set, his posture firm. And though the photograph was old, though time had softened the lines of his face, there was no mistaking it. It was him, the old man from the mess hall. It's him. But that's from what? Vietnam? No way. One of them read the small brass plate beneath the frame aloud. 1st Cavalry Division, Forward Squadron. APBAC Recon. 1967. The room grew heavier. They'd mocked him, laughed at his hands, dismissed him as fragile. But here he was, immortalized on a wall they'd passed 100 times without noticing. And the questions multiplied. What had he seen? What had he done? Why had no one told them? He sat at his usual place, but this time, the recruits hesitated before mocking him. One by one, they carried their trays toward his table. Not to join him. Not yet, but to sit close enough that his silence brushed against their curiosity. They wanted answers, but none dared ask, until one finally did. "Sir." The words slipped out before the recruit could catch himself. Is that you in the photo? The one with the phantom?" The old man set his cup down slowly. The tremor was there, rattling porcelain against metal. For the first time, he looked directly at them. His eyes, though weathered, carried the same sharpness as in the photo. Yes, no story, no explanation. Just one word. But it was enough to silence the room. Not in a speech, not in a lecture, just fragments revealed between steady breaths as he cleaned his rifle. He told them about the ambush near APBAC, how the jungle swallowed sound until it exploded in violence, how every trigger pull felt heavier when the man in his sights was barely more than a shadow. He told them about nights on airfields where phantoms lined the tarmac, their engines howling like beasts ready to devour the sky. He told them of missions where they flew into storms of anti-air fire, where tracers cut the night into ribbons of fire, where survival was measured not in victories but in returns. And he told them of silence, the silence after battles, the silence of folded flags, the silence of names carved into black stone back home. The recruits listened. For once they didn't laugh. One asked what it felt like to fly a phantom into combat. Another asked how he stayed calm when everything fell apart. And he answered simply, without flourish, without drama. "The trick isn't not being afraid," he said. "It's moving forward anyway." His hands shook as he spoke, but his voice never did. That evening, they noticed something new. On his tray beside the chipped coffee mug lay a small coin, heavy, old, its edges worn smooth. He set it down carefully before leaving the mess hall. The recruits gathered around after he left. On one side, the coin bore the insignia of the 1st Cavalry Division. On the other, just 2 words. "Still here." It was a reminder for him, for those he'd lost, for the silence that carried more weight than any medal. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but slowly. The laughter faded. Respect replaced mockery. The nickname Grandpa fell silent, replaced by a nod of acknowledgement whenever he passed. And one by one, recruits found themselves watching him differently. Not as an old man with shaking hands, but as proof that strength isn't always loud and courage doesn't vanish with age. Because sometimes the hands that tremble the most are the ones that once held steady when everything else fell apart. By the end of that training cycle, the story had already grown beyond the base. New recruits whispered it before they even saw him. "There's a man here, old, quiet, shakes when he holds a cup, but put a rifle in his hands, and you'll see something you'll never forget." They didn't need to know every detail. They didn't need to see every scar. The story lived in silence, in respect, in the photograph on the wall. And that was enough.